Okay. Morning, colleagues. I want to call the meeting of the Committee on Finance to order. The time is 10:08 on Monday, July 22nd, 2019. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes from the last council meeting of June 10th and 11th. Should it have in front of you the minutes per Rule 45 of these meetings? We have one amendment on its face to mark as present Alderman Scott. He was not absent as indicated on here, so I want to have a motion to make that amendment on its face, and we can report that out to the clerk's office. Alderman Hairston moves to pass. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it, and we'll report that out to the clerk's office, that change. All right, moving on to our agenda. Our first item up for business is the Department of Planning. In the Department of Planning Development is a proposed ordinance authorizing the Commissioner of the Department of Planning and Development to enter into and execute an IGA between the City of Chicago and the Board of Education regarding the redevelopment of Philip Rogers Elementary School located at 7345 North Washtenaw in the 50th Ward. The Board of Education has proposed a redevelopment plan to address overcrowding and accessibility. Project includes a construction of an annex linked to the school, which will include a lunchroom, classroom, specialty spaces, support areas, and other improvements, an ADA elevator accessible to all floors, an improved play lot and walk path, and targeted renovations for connections and updates of existing spaces pursuant to the building connections. This elementary school lies wholly within the boundaries of the Toohey Western redevelopment area, and pursuant to this proposed ordinance, the city will make available to the Board of Education a portion of the Toohey Western increment in an amount not to exceed $1,050,000. The overall cost of the project is estimated at $20 million. Alderman Silverstein, would you like to close on this matter? Would you like to have Mr. Harbin speak first to it, or?
That would be fine, thank you.
Okay. So we have Mr. James Harbin, Deputy Commissioner of Planning and Development, here to speak on this matter. Mr. Harbin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Finance Committee. For the record, my name is James Harbin, Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Planning and Development. I'm here to request your approval of an intergovernmental agreement between the Chicago Board of Education and the Department of Planning and Development to provide tax increment financing funds to reimburse the costs associated with improvements at Phillips Rogers Elementary School. Rogers Elementary is located at 7345 North Washtenaw in the Rogers Park community. Deborah Silverstein of the 50th Ward is the alderman. The project will provide TIF funding to the Chicago Public Schools in order to construct a new linked annex that will include a lunchroom, typical classrooms, specialty spaces, and support areas. A new ADA elevator is also planned for accessible access to all floor levels. Site improvements will include a new play lot along with a reconfigured parking space and walking path. The existing building will receive targeted renovations for the conversion of the existing kitchen space and connection building systems to the annex. The total project cost is $20 million. TIF funding will be provided in the amount not to exceed $1,050,000, which is 5% of the funding for the project will come from CPS. Alderman Silverstein is in favor of this project and has provided a letter of support in March.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Harbin? Alderman Hairston.
Thank you. I think that this is wonderful that they are making these improvements to the school. My question is really about where the other $19 million is coming from CPS.
I would have to defer that answer to the chair and get back to you. I'm not sure where CPS is getting
Okay,
it from.
and so with that, I would like to know where on the south side, or actually in the 5th Ward, but I'm sure my other south side colleagues would love to know what similar improvements are being made to some of the elementary schools on the south side. You know, because $19 million is a lot. You know, a very small portion comes from the TIF, which is good, but that the bulk of it is coming from CPS. And so I just want to make sure that they are making the same amount of investments, substantial investments in Southside schools.
I can follow up with the chair.
Thank you.
Yep.
South and west?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm
I
sorry,
think, yes, Alderman Austin is requesting that it go to the other alderman as well, but I think maybe what we can do is ask for CPS to give us a full list of projects for this upcoming year. If we could have that for every alderman, we will ask CPS and have it forwarded to you through the chair. And Alderman Lopez?
Thank you, Chairman. That will be broken down by ward.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Any other aldermen have questions on this one? So I'll defer to Alderman Silverstein. Oh, wait, Alderman Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. Can we at some point get an overall sense of where CPS is on their capital planning? I'm not sure if that's what you just said, but you did. I'm sorry, I was talking to Alderman Tully-Farrell. I apologize. But they're going to
that's
do
okay.
that. That's fine. Thank you.
Alderman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To everybody's point, in September, when we have the Education Committee, they'll be coming to talk about capital, all of that kind of stuff. So if there are any things that need to happen, if you could let the chair know or let me know of things that you want of CPS in their budget, we'll bring them before in September. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Alderman Scott, do you want to ask CPS then, or do you want us to continue with this project and other projects and then follow up with the
If
capital?
anything that you have that they're asking, if you can just let me know, I will make sure that it is brought to the body in September.
Okay.
Thank you,
We
Mr.
will
Chair.
do that. Alderman Osterman?
I'm glad Chairman Scott's going to have CPS come over and talk about their capital plan. To the project and Alderman Silverstein, I think Rogers School is a very fine school in the West Ridge area, and I think the diverse population of students, this project is going to be an asset that's going to keep families in that community going to public schools. So I think it's a great program, and I want to commend the alderman. Thank you.
Alderman Dow, did you have a? No. Alderman Silverstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in full support of this, and I want to thank you all for your support. Rogers School has been overcrowded for years and years. This has been a big ask from the parent body for many, many years. When I toured the school most recently, there were children being pulled out in the stairwells, in every corner, any available space, they were being pulled out to be taught. And I'm really happy that they're finally getting the school that they deserve. It's an excellent school with an excellent principal, and I'm really, really pleased that this is happening. So thank you for your support.
All right, thank you, Alderman Silverstein. May I have a motion for approval of this item? Alderman Tunney. Moved by Alderman Tunney. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harvin. Our next item is a communication recommending a proposed ordinance concerning the authority to enter into and execute an intergovernmental agreement with the Illinois International Port District for the redevelopment of Butler Drive Rail and Butler Drive Road. This project was initiated by Planning and Development and Alderwoman Sedlowski Garza in the 10th Ward. Alderman Garza, Sedlowski Garza, where are you sitting? Would you like to speak now, or would you like to wait until the end to close?
I'll close.
Okay. So we have Tim Jeffries, Deputy Commissioner in the Department of Planning and Development, here to speak on the matter, and Clayton Harris, the Executive Director of the Illinois International Port District, is also present should his testimony be necessary. Tim, Mr. Jeffries, could you give us an overview of this project, please?
Sure. So, morning, Chairman Waxback, members of the Finance Committee. The intergovernmental agreement before you today is between the city and the Illinois International Port District, or the IIPD. The IIPD operates the Port of Chicago, which is the largest port by tonnage on the Great Lakes, an important center of industry for Chicago. This agreement will authorize the use of approximately $3.5 million in TIF assistance for a $16.7 million reconstruction of 1.2 miles of Butler Drive and the adjoining freight rail line. These improvements are located on IIPD property in the vicinity of 130th Street and Stony Island Avenue in the 10th Ward and South Deering community area. The proposed infrastructure improvements will be completed over 2 phases. Phase 1 is the $2.5 million replacement of the existing freight rail lines. These rails are in poor condition and as a result have seen derailments occur over the past 2 years. In addition to being a clear safety hazard, the poor condition has also caused shipping and receiving delays. This phase would be 100% TIF funded and is set to begin construction as soon as possible. Phase 2 is the reconstruction of the existing Butler Drive between Doty Avenue and Stony Island Avenue. Butler serves as the primary access point to the IIPD facilities for an estimated 300 trucks a day, but it is in poor condition and is not built to modern standards. Specifically, the street has large unpaved sections and an antiquated drainage system, both of which have resulted in further deterioration of both the roadway and the rails. IIPD has secured $13.2 million in grant funding from Cook County and IDOT. This will be used, TIF will be used to match those funds for $1 million. Design and construction for this phase is expected to be completed in 2023. So in total, the city would reimburse IIPD up to $3.5 million or 20.8% of the total project costs in area-wide funds from the Lake Calumet Industrial TIF District. Funds will be placed into escrow with IIPD drawing down on them during construction or paid out during completion. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Clayton Harris, the president of the IIPD, is also here to address any questions.
Okay. Alderman Moore, questions for Mr. Jeffries, or Commissioner Jeffries?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to be clear and say in total the city will reimburse IPD up to $3.5 million. So that 3.5 includes the 1, or is that 3.5 in addition to the 1?
3.5 total, so 2.5 for phase 1, which is the rails, and $1 million for phase 2, which is the reconstruction of Butler Drive.
All right. And to understand this whole International Port District, which I don't fully understand what they do, how many people do they employ?
I think Mr. Clay or Mr. Harris is better to answer that.
Alderman, first of all, thank you, Chairman. Alderman, we have 5 employees.
For the whole district?
Yes, sir.
And
Alderwoman Sadowski Garza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point of information, I'd like to just let Alderman Moore know that the International Port does only have 5 employees, but they are in the largest planned manufacturing district in the whole city of Chicago, which encompasses the whole river. So there's about 6,000 employees that work along the river that this will affect.
okay, and that's what I need to know.
Yes, sir,
I didn't think 5 employees is going to be doing all this work. So 6,000 employees, these are full-time workers currently that she's referring to.
Yes, Alderman.
Do you have a breakdown of those positions and the ethnicities of those positions?
I do, but so we're clear, the IIPD, the Illinois International Port District, only employs, there's only 5 of us, and we will be doing all the work.
Okay.
But because of the operations that the Illinois International Port District engages in, it supports, and actually it's closer to 8,000 jobs along the region. So to your question about the ethnicity and the breakdown, absolutely. So the 5 of us, 3 are African American, 1's Latino, and 1's a Caucasian.
Right, of the 5, but I'm talking about these
Correct.
8,000 jobs that she's
Out
referring
of
to.
the 8,000, no, sir. I don't have that breakdown, no, sir.
Who has that? Because they're going to be doing all of this work.
No, sir.
So this $4.5 million worth of work, money that we're securing, only 5 people going to be doing that work?
We will be contracting out the rail work, and the rail work will be done by a contractor that'll do that. But as far as the people that run the Illinois International Port District, there are 5 of us. Yes, sir.
Okay, then I'm confused about what 8,000 people you're talking about, if I can ask Chairman Garza, Mr. Chairman.
Alderwoman, yeah.
Alderman Moore, along the river are home to many industries, the grain elevators, PVC chemical. I can go on and on and on and name all the businesses that are there. I don't have the breakdown of each individual business along the planned manufacturing district that sits within the port. I'd like to invite you to send a personal invitation to come, and I'd be happy to take you on a tour of what exists there. And and I'm glad to hear it's 8,000, not 6,000, even better. These are industries, it's a major waterway, it's a federal waterway that is home to ships and shipments that, you know, go to the, into the Great Lakes every day. There's hundreds of industries that are there that
Right,
employ
okay,
these people.
and I understand that from, I don't need to see the industry, I'm talking about, okay, so you all just run the port, only 5 people.
So we're clear, we're a landlord port. We have about 24 tenants within the port, and then we have 2 facilities, Iroquois Landing, which is at the southwest corner of Lake Michigan and then the Calumet River, and then Lake Calumet in and of itself. And in between the 2 facilities, there's 69 other businesses. But the impact that the port has is not just the 69 businesses in between the 2 facilities or the 24 industries that are located within our boundaries. It's quantified as the industries that are affected by the commodities we're bringing in. So we deal with steel, sugar, lumber, and all of those. So those are where the numbers get quantified and qualified.
And so, but from the operations of the port itself, and that's all I'm
IFS.
focusing on, just the operations, people responsible for operating the port, not the businesses, because
Okay.
you have to operate the port to make it conducive for those businesses. And so just operating the port itself, it's only 5
Correct.
people. Okay, and then when we do this project, then we do special projects such as this, then you go out and contract people to do that. Now, your procurement process for this, how is that set up in terms of contracting, where this, I don't know if you call a general contractor or whatever, how's that set up?
Yes, Alderman, what we'll go through is an RFP process. We'll adhere to the standards set by the City of Chicago.
Okay.
And we'll set with the minority standards and above. Some of the work is specialized, but we will make sure that we are meeting the numbers or exceeding the numbers for minority participation.
All right. We could talk offline more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alderman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Alderman Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may sound a little weird, but if we've been having this conversation around the issue of gaming, and how does this work that you're doing potentially impact any site situation or other ideas around gaming on port property? And the reason I say this is because if you're going to spend $20 million, is that a sunk cost, or is it something that you have to do, or something that potentially you may not need to do or may be ripping out in 18 or 24 months?
So this is completely independent of any conversation. I've been working on this. I've been the executive director now for 3 years. This is absolutely necessary for the port, regardless of anything else that happens. So this is along Butler Drive. It's between Stony Island and Doty, east and west, and it's located approximately from 130th Street to about 127th Street. Doty Avenue is the lifeline of the port at Lake Calumet. So we deal with truck traffic that's coming through. We have rail that goes down the center, and it backs up to the docks right there. So all of the traffic that comes to and through the port at Lake Calumet comes through Butler Drive. Butler Drive is paved through maybe a little more than half, and then it's a dirt road, and then it's a dirt road with potholes, not conducive to trucks that are coming to and through. And then the Commissioner spoke about the rail aspects of it, which is what the TIF is going to specifically, and then the other funds are going to the road, and we have been experiencing derailments. And because it's one drag that comes down the port, when we have a derailment, it shuts everything down. So I don't want to sit here and say we have derailments every day. We don't, but the track, it's very hard to maintain, and we're running from, one to another, and we need to fix it so that we stop everything.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman.
Thank you, Alderman Irvin. Alderman Riley. Alderman Riley.
Thank you, Chairman. And certainly based on testimony, it sounds like this is a necessary project for sure. You mentioned at the beginning of your testimony, Commissioner, that this is a blend of public funds being dedicated to handle this project, a portion of it being state grant money, a portion being county, and then the $3.5 million in TIF funds. What's the breakdown between the county and the state as far as their portion of funding for the project?
Sure. Yeah, it's $1 million from TIF. It's $300,000 as an Invest in Cook grant, which is Cook County, obviously. And then there's two IDOT grants, their competitive development program, or the economic development program, and their competitive freight program. And in total, that's about $13 million.
$13 million. And just to be clear, that these funds were dedicated to this project by the state of Illinois, by IDOT, prior to passage of the state's capital bill or after?
These are outside of the...
Outside of?
Yeah, these are competitive grant programs. The Port District applied and secured them.
Understood. And does the port have plans to pursue any of the proceeds from the state's capital bill that was recently passed? Did you have a list of projects you were hoping the state would consider directing money towards, obviously through the programs that exist with local match, et cetera?
Absolutely, Alderman. We went down the request for the Illinois International Port District and then the Illinois Ports Association. There are 19 within the state, and the request was $250 million from the state. We were awarded, the Illinois Ports Association, $150 million. Out of the 250 requested, $100 million was requested by the Illinois International Port District. I'm not sure yet how we will divide up percentage-wise or project-wise, but projects were submitted to the state for that request.
And there'll be, to be clear, there'll be 18 other port districts vying for that pot of money, or is it a portion based on how busy your port is and the volume of goods you move through those ports? How does that work?
Right, and Alderman, I don't want to misspeak because the devil's in the details and it hasn't been released yet, but all 19 ports weren't at the table. They're more at the table now, and I think that's a great thing. This is the first time the state has allocated money to the ports out of the capital bill. So I believe the formula will be one more on need, volume, business that's going through, but I know they want to help out all of the ports if possible.
But our port district has identified hundreds of millions of dollars in need, is that correct?
Yes.
And do you suspect that you'll be before this body from time to time over the next couple of years looking for, would these capital projects, by your estimation or the way that you've applied for them, be entirely funded through the capital bill? Would they also require then a local match to capture that money? I know that they write those in two different ways when we used to do capital bills before.
Yes, sir. One of the things that we're looking to do is any state dollars that we're able to receive that come back, capital dollars, we're looking to use that as the federal match to get larger dollars to come back to the port. There are identified plans that are already in the works, and if we're not allowed to use the money as match, then we'll go through that. But the port is governed by a 9-body board of directors. 5 are appointed by the mayor and 4 are appointed by the governor. And there are other things that we can do to generate revenue. First and foremost, our licenses, leases, and the administration of Foreign Trade Zone number 22. But then we can bond ourselves, and we can do other aspects like that, sir.
Understood. So you think that with the capital projects you're hoping to be funded as a result of what Springfield did this past year, that some of those projects won't require the city council to put up local match money?
Correct.
Great. All right. Thank you for answering my questions, and thank you, Chairman Wagasback.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Dowell, then Villegas and Brookins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Mr. Harris. Good to see you
Alderwoman,
this morning.
Hi, Alderman.
The rail lines, what rail companies use them?
Alderman Dowell, that's a great question. We are an extremely unique port. 6 of the 7 North American Class I railroads come into our port. It's more than New Orleans or any of the other larger port districts in the United States. But we use short lines to bring in from the Class I. Currently, Chicago South Shore and South Bend, they bring in from Norfolk Southern, all the other larger rail lines that come through, and then the Chicago Rail Link is looking to come back on also to provide service to the port.
Okay, and I didn't hear any of the rail lines contributing to the infrastructure improvements. Why is that?
The Chicago South Shore, they pay maintenance now on what's going on, but they just maintain it. And what we're trying to do is improve the whole system that's going on right there. And then the maintenance of it, again, will fall back onto the short line.
Okay. Do you ship hazardous materials over those lines?
Not currently.
Okay. And you mentioned 5 mayoral appointments and 4 gubernatorial appointments. Did I get that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Who are the mayoral appointments serving on your board now?
Currently, the chairman of the board is Michael Ford. We have Charles Bowen. So the mayoral appointees, Charles Bowen, Terrence Fitzmaurice, former Alderman Ray Suarez, and I'm trying to go down.
That's
Also,
1,
I'm
2,
missing one.
3, 4.
Yes,
You're
ma'am.
missing somebody, if you remember.
So it's Delmar Suarez, Bowen, Sullivan, Fitzmaurice,
Sullivan.
Ford.
That was not a name I heard.
Sorry, right.
Okay.
No, it's not. Terry Sullivan is governor. Henry Wisniewski. I apologize.
All right. And you mentioned that you have city standards, the regular MBE, WBE standards.
That's what we
And
follow,
this-
yes, ma'am.
This will go out for bid when?
We should be putting it back out again for next week.
And will you be having bid conferences
Yes.
on this? Can you send the alderman information on those bid opportunities?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderwoman Dowell. If we could put that through the chair, and we'll send it out to each one of the aldermen. Alderman Villegas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to see that we're investing in this port. This is a huge asset for the state of Illinois, and as an inner port, very crucial to economic development for the state of Illinois and for the region. So I'm glad to see that we're doing that and that you guys were successful in getting some money from the capital bill. Mr. Chairman, in your opening testimony, you stated or you said that the planning department was the agency that initiated this plan here. Did the planning department initiate this, or was this the Port Authority and then the planning department assisted them with it?
I think Commissioner Jeffries can answer that, but I think I was referring just to as far as city departments came through them.
It was the latter. As with other IGAs for the CTA or the Park District, the DPD works with those agencies to bring them through. The requests originated with
Yeah.
Mr.
Thank you.
Harris.
So, yeah, because I
missed.
was just curious about that because with the planning department, unfortunately, they do not initiate a lot of these investments. So I just wanted to point that out there. I'm pretty sure that the Port Authority did that and just planning assisted. I'm glad to see that Mr. Harris is at the Port Authority, someone that I've worked with in the past at the Illinois Department of Transportation. And I can tell you my colleagues that are concerned with minority women business opportunities, and Mr. Harris is very sensitive on that issue, and I would just like to say that I'm positive that he will ensure that minority and women-owned businesses are participating in these types of infrastructure investments, similar to what he did at the Illinois Department of Transportation under his command. So just wanted to point that. I'm glad that this city and this state is finally investing in these ports. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Brookins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the opening remarks, it says that this port is one of the largest ports of tonnage on the Great Lakes. I assume, therefore, that this district is economically viable?
We are now. We're working on that, and that's what we've been working on the last 3 years, is getting our financial house back in order.
But there's been ongoing business, ongoing shipping, and people working, and people paying fees for going to the port, et cetera.
That is correct.
So I would assume you wouldn't therefore classify this as a blighted area?
I'm sorry, as a what?
Blighted. Blight.
Blighted area.
Blight.
A blighted area, I would say that, I guess it could be considered that.
How would you say that if it's economically viable?
Well, I guess it depends on where you look at economically viable. So we are able to pay the bills. What we should be generating might be another question on where we are. I would say in the last 3 to 5 years, we certainly have started to turn the ship around. I would say we're not 100% there, but we are economically viable, absolutely. So I guess what I thought you were talking
More so
about.
in areas of Auburn, Gresham, Inglewood, Austin? You would consider it more economically viable than some of those areas, right?
Well, we're within those areas, so when you asked about that question, that's why I answered that to our, southwest is Alkel Gardens, to our southeast is Hegwish, and to our northwest is Pullman. So we're right there in that area. But
So this money's not going to Algale Gardens, though, right?
well, the impact of the money and what happens at the port actually, arguably, I guess, affects the entire region.
But the impact is not to better the commute for people who live in Algale Gardens, but to better support the ability of trucks to get to your business.
Correct. Yes, this improvement is 100% port related.
With respect to the WMBE program, what are the numbers of the program as broken out? What percentage is supposed to go to women, blacks, or minorities?
We'll be adhering to the 26 and 6.
And over the past, have those programs been audited?
Have the programs been audited?
Yes.
I've only been there for 3 years. This is my
Okay, in the past 3 years, have the programs been audited?
This is my first program. This is the first one.
So you wouldn't be able to say what percentage have gone to African Americans?
I would not.
In the
This
past?
time, this is the first project, sir.
And this would be the only project that would qualify to determine whether or not minority businesses should participate?
This is our first project, I guess, if that's right.
So you don't have a program, an ongoing program for women and minority businesses to purchase things from other than when you have a big project?
Correct. There's not a whole lot of, when you say purchasing, we're not purchasing.
Supplies, paper, copiers, you
Okay,
name it.
right. No, we go to Quill. We're a small operation. I mean, when I say
Small
there's 5
operation
of
with
us,
3,000? I thought somebody
no,
said there were
no,
3,000.
there's 5 of us that run the Illinois International Port District. There's myself, I have 3 maintenance people and an assistant. So when you ask about our program, you're asking, what am I doing? So when I need paper, I go to Quill. When you ask about our technology, when you ask about who's setting up the computers, you're looking at them. When you're asking about who's sending out the RFPs and who's writing them, I am. We're a small operation. We have a large function.
So what's your budget a year?
We are, revenue right now is probably conservatively $5 million annually.
And so where does that $5 million get spent on salaries?
It's not spent on salaries, sir. It's spent on operations.
So that's what I'm saying. What's the so with a $5 million annual budget, there's no minority or women-owned participation in the spending of the $5 million?
Alderman Brookins, point of information from Alderwoman Sadowski Garza.
I think what people, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what people need to understand is, and just to cut to the chase, Clayton is the landlord of the 79 businesses along the river. He makes sure that the infrastructure is improved so they have roads to get to their business. And the economic impact, yes, it is a blighted area. The southeast side has a 22% unemployment rate. So we are a blighted area. I can guarantee you that. He sits within that blighted area. And those jobs, we've worked with the businesses along the river to hold job fairs. A lot of them are union labor, and they work with us. We have one coming up in August. I'd be happy to share that with everyone to send out to your constituents. I think we have over 19 businesses that are going to participate in this job fair at the UAW Hall, actually that sits along the river.
So
We provide opportunities to everyone to make sure they get jobs there.
Okay, well, let me go back to Alderman Brookins, and we'll.
That's not my point. My point is, and I asked the question, they got $5 million. Where are you spending the $5 million? That's the question.
We spend the money on, we do spend it on salaries, the five of us. It's a paid board. We have maintenance and operations. That's where all of our money goes.
So I assume that, so that's my question with respect to the program and spending the $15 million over the past 3 years since you've been the executive director. I assume less than half of that is salary. So where's the $2.5 million being
Right,
spent?
and
And is there a program for women and minority-owned businesses? And yes, there are blighted areas throughout in response to my colleague, there are blighted areas throughout the city of Chicago that don't have TIF areas, that don't have the ability to raise $5 million, that have lousy streets, that have greater unemployment than that, and we can't get any relief. That's my point.
So Director Harris, why don't you, if you can respond in brief, and then what perhaps you can do is give us more details through the chairs that we can supply to each one of the aldermen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To your question directly, we don't have any programs. We're up to $5 million this year. We started at a deficit when I came in 3 years ago. So we have been right-sizing contracts. That's where, and we have been going out to encourage more industry and business to come to the port. And again, for the most part, every dollar that we raise in revenue is put out in expenses.
Okay,
Perhaps
so
a
through the
good way
chair,
to-
he's going to get to us what those expenses
Yeah,
are
and I-
that lead up to spending the $5 million to right-size the contracts that the minorities aren't getting.
I think that he will provide details on those contracts,
Thank you.
similar to what we have on procurement, and then through the chair, we can get that out to each one of the aldermen. But I think a list over the last 3 years of the contracts that you've had and the participation at each one of those contracts would be helpful as well.
Thank you.
Alderman Daley Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just as a follow-up, just a suggestion is that you start looking into putting a MBE, WBE policy in place, perhaps. I know there's only 5 of you, but I think that's what Chairman Brookins was getting at. And I think it makes sense with government agencies to be inclusive. Okay, my question is, yeah, we're spending this money on roads and rail. I understand the roads. Do we own the rail lines?
The Illinois International Port District does.
Okay, and so do we collect rent from, or a user fee from the South Shore and from all the rails that go across that?
At this time right now, we get maintenance from them.
And the capital work that you're asking, I don't know how much of the $16.7 million, or more pertinently, the $3.5 million of TIF is spent on rail versus road?
All 2.5 million of the 3 point will be rail, and then the 1 million is going to work to connect the rail back to the road.
Okay, so that 2.5 isn't deemed to be maintenance, that's capital that the users of the line will not pay for?
Correct.
Okay. And then are you renegotiating the agreement with the railroads that they do pay us for the usage?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and where are you in that process?
It will occur after the improvements of the rail line, sir.
And what are the terms?
Those are to be negotiated.
Still being negotiated?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is it a spur, or is it just a spur that connects to your tenants out there, or is it?
So we have a rail line, we have a rail yard also in there. We're not talking about the rail yard. It's the connectivity that brings the rail across from the Norfolk Southern. There's a J-hook that goes over the Bishop Ford,
Okay.
south of the Pullman area. So it comes across the Bishop Ford. That J-hook brings it into the port. At that time, once it comes into the port, it goes into the rail yard, and then the rail comes down Butler Drive. So there are spurs along Butler Drive, but we're talking about the rail in and of itself, and then spurs in front of the transit sheds. So there are 3 main transit sheds on the northern side of it, and there will be spurs that go to each of the 3. Shed 1 is considerably larger than shed 2 and 3. I believe currently there are 2 spurs for both sheds 2 and 3, and 4 at shed 1. I'm not sure 100% of the design, if we're going to keep 4 at 1 and then 2 at each of the other ones, but there will be spurs coming out of the main line.
And that's part of the 2.5 or part of the overall
Yes,
project?
sir.
Okay. And that will presumably enhance the value there and create
Absolutely.
more. So is that one of the issues that's been limiting you?
Absolutely, is being able to attract more tenants to come in as well, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, good luck with those negotiations, and hopefully the Port Authority will start flowing positive cash flow here, and it'll be a true asset for the city. Thanks.
Alderwoman Sadlowski Garza. Thank you, Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Clayton Harris, for being here today, and thank you to my colleagues as well. Great questions, you guys. I just want to give people a little background about what's happening over here. Clayton has been at the port for 3 years. Prior to that, there was a port director that was there for 30 years that literally has allowed this place to crumble. The infrastructure there was never any improvements, never a vision to push this place forward. This could be a world-class port. In the 3 years that Clayton Harris has been there, it has turned around immensely. He's investing, he's looking for dollars, he's going to Springfield, he's advocating for this place. I'm glad to hear that it's 8,000 workers, not 6. When I took office 4 years ago, there were 6,000 workers. So we have 2,000 workers more, which is a testament to you, sir. We have our seawalls there have holes the size of Volkswagens. I don't know if any of you guys know, but there's Great Lakes cruises that cruise the lakes. The first thing they see when they come to Chicago is they dock the cruise line, like a Carnival cruise, docks on 92nd Street. The people get off the cruise, and the first thing they see is a hole in the floor. That's their first impression of Chicago. We have to invest in the port to make sure that people can live and work and grow this thing, because we have the largest port in the Great Lakes, right? Second largest port in the Great Lakes. This can be an economic engine that really serves not just the state of Illinois, but the world and Chicago. So I want to commend you for what you're doing there. Again, the port runs from 92nd Street all the way to 136th Street. It's big, it's huge. We have to invest in our infrastructure and keep it moving so it can keep growing. Thank you for all you're doing, sir.
Alderman Hairston.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, when you do the negotiations, are you going to be the only one doing the negotiations, or do you have a legal team, or?
We have a legal team, and the chairman of the board has to go through as well.
Okay, so would you please provide through the chair who the legal team is?
The legal team is Neil and Leroy.
Okay. And then just as a matter for future reference, when you bring something, and maybe you can, and Alderman Garza could do a briefing for the aldermen with pictures so that we can get an idea about the J-hook and the little nodes that come through, because it's very difficult to try to visualize it if you're not familiar with the area. So, and I don't know if that's a question or a recommendation for the chair, for anybody that is presenting something to the council that would be aided by a visual, I guess that's at your discretion, but that would really be helpful to the council members. So if we could get a briefing so that all the council members can see, the disrepair of the port, I think that might be very helpful.
Alderwoman Dowell. Thank you, Alderman Hairston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one last question. Mr. Harris, you mentioned that you are the landlord. and you're trying to attract more people to the port or more businesses to the port. What's the total number of units that you have, and what's the occupancy? How many units are you trying to fill?
So it's not quite like that. So we're leasing land. So currently we have about 100 acres that's available for lease. We could have one tenant that would come in, or we could have 100 tenants that could come in. Currently we have 22, and then we have the 100 acres that are available. So I couldn't tell you how many.
That's 100 acres out of how many acres?
So there's 1,600 acres at Lake Calumet and another 190 acres at Iroquois Landing.
Okay. So you're not that far away.
Yes, ma'am.
Just got a little work to do.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Dahl. If you'd like, if you could provide a map, and you talked about the J-hook, as Alderman Hairston said, if we could just have an indication of where all these pieces are you spoke about today, and we can forward it to the alderman via email or at the next meeting, that would be helpful.
Yes,
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Chair, I'll send you a complete packet.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Alderman Beal, yes.
Thank you. Again, I do apologize. I came in a few minutes late. Can you identify where this TIF money is coming from?
It's area-wide funding from the Lake Calumet TIF District.
Okay. Any part of that, there's still a portion of that Lake Calumet TIF in the 9th Ward, correct?
I don't. I'll need to check my files and the records to see if it's in there. I can provide that to you through the chair.
Yep, part of it. I just curious because I'm pretty sure that it's still in the 9th Ward, but the vast majority of it was broken out when we created the new TIF on the Bishop Ford. But is it your practice not to inform the aldermen that you're taking TIF money out of their wards?
It's been our practice that we ask your colleagues to communicate these things. So, yes.
Yes, what?
It has not been our practice to directly communicate this. Traditionally, we've asked that to go through our colleagues. Traditionally, we've asked each other, your colleagues, to communicate points with each other.
It's typically the responsibility of the department to communicate with the aldermen and the surrounding aldermen who are affected by the TIF money to let them know exactly what TIF money is being used for as far as different projects is concerned, correct?
It really depends. As I said, traditionally, I think that people have asked to go through their colleagues. That's all. Yes. Traditionally, that's how it has been.
Okay.
Alderman Beal still
finish.
has the
Let me
floor.
finish.
1 second, please.
It was my understanding that, the last time we looked at that Lake Calumet TIF, there was very little money in that TIF. So I'm just curious where we're getting $3.5 million.
I'm not sure what time you looked at it last. We've been working on this project for at least a year and change, so we've had a soft hold since then. I'm happy to go through the full projections with you, but I'm not sure what time you looked at them last. Presumably, I'm assuming you were looking at them with OBM.
Okay, you guys, are you front loading this TIF? Is it a pay as you go or?
It's during construction.
Okay, so you're paying this money out up front?
I believe the first $2 million will come out during construction, so over the next year as construction happens on the rail portion, and then the $1 million will come out as, over time as the construction for that happens, which is estimated to be completed in 2023. So it will come out over that period as well.
Okay, well, I'm just real curious to see how, we're proceeding as far as communication is concerned when you're taking TIF money out of people's wards without informing them. No matter how small the piece may be in their particular ward, I think there still should be some communication as far as money being taken out of the TIF for particular projects. Not that I support the project. It's not a question because the port is on life support right now. So I support the project and trying to move forward. And I do believe that Mr. Harris has done a yeoman's job turning this place around. But at the same time, these TIFs are created to help the community, and we support these TIFs when they're created. And you guys should communicate with us on what this money is going towards and when it's being taken out of our particular wards. I think that's just a common courtesy to see if we support it or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Beal. Alderman Dowell, then Hairston and Lopez.
Yes, I just want to piggyback on Alderman Beal's comments. Actually, Mr. Jeffries, that's not true. The department in the past has reached out when there is a TIF that is shared by various aldermen and you're going to use money in that TIF in a particular alderman's ward. You all did communicate with the aldermen that shared that TIF and required letters of support, because I have written such letters and have had other aldermen write such letters to support projects in my ward. Now, if that's going to change, that's a different story. But the reality is that the planning department did reach out to the aldermen. So I don't know how long you've been there, but, and if all right, so you're saying going forward, that's your policy now?
No, that's not what I said. It's been my experience that if a letter of support from another alderman was requested, that we would ask. In this case, we would have asked Alderman Garza to reach out to her colleagues, whoever they might have been.
That's not her role. That should be the responsibility of the department. And I would hope that you would go back and continue the policy that you used to have, or at least a phone call is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dowell. Alderman Hairston.
Not to belabor the point, but I think a little bit of history is here. It used to be the practice to exclude the aldermen when they were taking money from your TIF. I had that happen to me on numerous occasions, and I was not informed. Subsequently, the rule was adopted, or the practice was adopted, that the alderman impacted, any alderman that is impacted by any portion of the TIF was to be notified. That has and continues to be unless that has changed. It is not the alderman's responsibility. That is the Department of Planning and Development. I assume that's why you're called Planning and Developing. There is no transparency here. If you're going to be transparent, then you need to be transparent, which means you need to be inclusive of all of the aldermen. And I just think that I would like some clarification on what the expectations are now, because apparently there's some confusion within the department as to who is supposed to do what. And I think it would be very helpful to those of us in the council where you all are making rules willy-nilly and, just making them up as you go, and there's no consistency. So we, the members of the council, would appreciate something in writing to let us know what the expectations are. Unless this is something that you all have, does this fall under the getting rid of the executive, or the prerogative, the automatic prerogative, that we will now not be notified about money being taken in our ward, that you all don't have to communicate with us? Is that your understanding?
That's not my understanding, no.
I think through the chair, if the commissioner could provide a very specific memorandum outlining what their position is. Yes. And what the aldermen expect for every TIF project or any other expenditure that is shared between wards. We would like to see that through the chair if you could, so we can get it to every alderman.
Thank you.
Alderman Lopez.
Thank you, Chairman. I, too, just want to join my colleagues in saying that your revision of history is incorrect. Because even in trying to get something as simple as lighting, when shared with my colleague in the 16th Ward, it wasn't on me to tell her. And when there were projects that were coming forward from either other departments, like CDOT, when Vision Zero was big in this city, it was incumbent on the departments to do the footwork. And, one of my questions was going to be, was this executive order related? But this was started 18 months ago, which would make me wonder if you engaged Alderman Garza and Alderman Beal as the two wards that are impacted. Do you have that information? Well, no, but I mean, but that's my point. It's that nothing has changed other than how you're trying to explain that things have worked, when in fact that's not the case. For at least the 4 years that I've been here, that I've never seen this, where departments would not at least inform aldermen, let alone engage them and get their support even when it was required. Out of curiosity, what is the balance of this TIF as of right now?
I don't have that information in front of me, but I can.
How do you ask for money from a TIF when you don't know what the balance is?
I can tell you that it's economically viable. It's gone.
That's
through
not what
all
I
the-
asked.
I know.
How can you write a check from a checkbook you don't have?
Point of information, Alderwoman Sadlowski Garza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's also asked to be provided through the chair to the alderman.
Point of information, first and foremost, Alderman Beal has about 6%, and I publicly want to apologize to my colleague. I agree. This has always been a collaboration, and I took for granted that the department would notify him. So, Alderman Beal, I apologize publicly that you were not informed. I was not aware that it was my role, and I don't appreciate being thrown, no pun intended, under the rail, that this was thrown into my lap that way.
Alderman Beal.
Thank you to the wonderful Alderman of the 10th Ward. I appreciate the apology. However, it is not your responsibility, to inform me. And so where I really appreciate that as a token, it is truly square on the department to let us know exactly, regardless of the percentage, because we used to have a larger percentage until we created a new TIF. But at the same time, whatever the percentage is, there's a courtesy to find out if the alderman supports it or not. So hopefully that your memorandum will reflect that going forward. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Beal. Alderman
And
Riley.
actually,
I'm sorry, you were still.
Yeah, I just
actually
want to
speaking.
reiterate just one fact, that I find it very disturbing that a department would come here asking for money without knowing how much money there is to spend, or what other projects are going to be impacted by taking $2.5 million out of a TIF. Because if, as Alderman Beal stated, that this was not a high-performing TIF, and if money was ported in or what have you, as someone who has TIFs that are always at the cusp of actually making money or not, to have any department just say we're going to pull out millions without regard for what your neighborhood plans are for it is extremely unsettling to me. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. Alderman Riley, to close.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for requesting that memo to clarify the department's process and policy regarding informing aldermen about pending TIF requests. I think that's important. But maybe a step further. It seems that there's a fair amount of confusion both within the department and outside of it on what many general processes are. And it seems that we shouldn't be sitting, and this is not a critique on the current administration they just got here. I'm talking about the last couple of administrations. Plus, it seems that we shouldn't be vetting and learning for the first time about investments like this in committee. If you're someone who actually has a piece of that TIF district, at a bare minimum, you should know, even if it's a small portion of your ward. And so I know that we're going to be having an appointment to vote on for the Commissioner of Planning. I understand that, from what I read, the mayor has made a good selection there. But I think during that process, it would be helpful for the current folks in DPD to really take a good hard look at how they're administering TIF. I think there's a great opportunity to do it differently. I know this administration is very much committed to transparency, and this could be a real opportunity for everyone to really finally achieve that transparency. And all of us have a better sense of what the process is when it comes to TIF-funded projects. As I was listening to my colleagues talk about it, I've had a kind of mix of experiences when it comes to being notified about TIF expenditures. As you all know, we don't spend a whole lot of TIF in the 42nd Ward, but we do use the increment here to support projects near it. And more often than not, in the last 12 years, I've learned about projects that were fully baked and negotiated, and they simply would show up and say, oh, by the way, this is going to happen, or here's a heads up. And that notification hardly ever came from a colleague. It was almost entirely driven by the department. And so I'm a bit concerned that there isn't a crystal clear policy that everyone involved understands, both on the administration side and the city council side. So I think that is something that our new Commissioner of Planning can make a priority to undertake when and if that person is confirmed. And so I just wanted to state for the record that I think we can do better, and I believe this administration is committed to doing better. But let's help be a part of that process and make sure that aldermen are getting the transparency and communication we need to serve our constituents. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Riley. And I think we haven't been notified of where that new commissioner is being, which committee they're being appointed in. But if it is here, if it's in zoning, I think every alderman that has those questions should directly make a statement about what we want to see, not just a question of it. Okay. On item number 3, may I have a motion for approval on this item? Move to pass by Alderman Hairston. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. This motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hairston. Let's see. Our item number 4 is a communication recommending a proposed ordinance concerning the authority to enter into and execute an intergovernmental agreement with the Chicago Park District for the redevelopment of McInerney Park. McInerney, sorry. This project is located at 4452 South Emerald Avenue in the 11th Ward. It includes the construction of a new playground, installation of new paving, fencing, lighting, and seating, and the installation of a drinking fountain. This park lies wholly within the boundaries of the 47th and Halsted redevelopment area. Pursuant to this proposed ordinance, the city shall make available to the Park District an increment in the amount not to exceed $552,000. Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson, would you like to say anything to this?
Yes, and I appreciate the formality. I think every time my name is mentioned, my confirmation name was John, if you guys want to include that every time you call my name. You just go with Alderman Thompson. It's
Yes,
pretty
sir.
easy.
Okay.
But anyway, in light of the previous discussion, I will say it was my fault. I thought that this particular park was in an adjacent TIF, and it was my error. And so I've since talked to Alderman Dowell. I have not had a chance to talk to Alderman Taylor about this, but I think we've come to an agreement because we share this TIF, and like the previous discussion where we have shared TIFs, all communities have different demands and needs, and I think it's important, as Alderman Riley was talking about, communicating with one another. So before we get started on this discussion, I heard it loud and clear, and I also knew it, and I apologize to Alderman Dowell and Alderman Taylor for not talking to them prior. This McInerney Park is adjacent to Alexander Graham School, so it's a campus with a park and school. The playground equipment there has been deteriorating over the years, and we've had a number of students that have been injured from the playground equipment at McInerney Park. And so the request here is for the $550,000 that will be used to basically repair that equipment and make it safer for the children in the community as well as those kids that attend Graham School. It's also going to include some fencing to make it even more secure. So I'm sure some other colleagues, or maybe my colleague Alderman Dowell, may want to say something, but on this I appreciate her support. I know we were talking about other projects going forward and how we can work our communities that border, working together where we share TIFs, and where if there's an opportunity in the 3rd Ward and perhaps we could port from another TIF that we may have additional monies, I would be absolutely supportive of that idea. This particular TIF has about a $5 million balance, and so using $550,000 of this TIF will not take a significant portion, about 10% of the overall balance, but I know there's other demands from other communities, so I appreciate the support. Thank you.
There are no other questions. Oh, Alderman Dowell, pardon me.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say to my colleague, I appreciate the conversation. I do have children who live in the 3rd Ward, specifically at Wentworth Gardens, who attends Graham School. So I think that the improvement in the park is something that's needed, and move, Mr. Chairman, do pass.
Alderman Dow moves to pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. Item number 5 is a proposed ordinance concerning the authority to enter into and execute an intergovernmental agreement with the Chicago Park District for the redevelopment of Bosley Park Playground. This project is in Alderman Thompson's ward as well. Would you like to speak to the matter now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, this is using TIF dollars to help public improvements at Bosley Park. It's adjacent to Holden School, and this park is in need of a facelift. It's been a number of years since any investment's been made there, and so this investment, we're going to actually port money from the 35th and Halsted TIF into this TIF to pay for that, and it'll be a great project for the kids as well as the community who'll be able to utilize the park as well as the students at Holden School. And I'm very proud that Holden became a level 1+ school this past year as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Thompson. If there are no further questions, may I have a motion for approval on this item? Alderman Lopez moves to pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Items 6 through 11 from the Department of Law, communications from the Department of Law, will be placed on file with the clerk. Miscellaneous items, I want to move to pass items 12 through 14 in the omnibus. Proposed order authorizing the payment of various small claims against the City of Chicago. Proposed order denying the payment of various claims against the City of Chicago, and a proposed order authorizing the payment of senior citizen rebate sewer claims. Does anyone wish to be heard on these individually? Moved to pass by Alderman Hairston. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The motion carries. Now moving on to the supplemental agenda. We have 2 cases from the Law Department, and Renee Rodney, the First Assistant Corporation Counsel. Could you please come up? Okay. So our first item on the supplemental agenda is Julisha Lee in the estate of Samira Lee versus Eric Rice Truck Tire Sales, Inc. in the City of Chicago. And Ms. Rodney will give you background on this.
Good morning. I'm Renee Rodney, First Assistant Corporation Counsel, and I'm here today to present 2 settlements for your consideration. While I have met many members of City Council already, I have not yet met everyone, but I'm sure that will change soon. As a brief introduction before I present the proposed settlements, I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, and I am very honored to be here testifying before this esteemed body. I recently joined the Law Department after working in the U.S. Attorney's Office for nearly 12 years, and I'm very excited to have the opportunity to serve the residents of the city I have always called home. As I previously mentioned, there are 2 settlements that the Law Department is proposing. The first would settle a lawsuit brought by Julisha Lee, who was crossing the street with her 7-year-old daughter, Samira Lee, when they were struck by a lawn mowing tractor operated by an independent contractor employed by the Department of Streets and Sanitation to cut weeds in vacant lots. The Law Department recommends settling this case for $4 million, which includes all attorney's fees and costs. On the morning of May 27, 2016, Julisha Lee was walking her only daughter to Providence Inglewood Charter School, located at 6515 South Ashland Avenue. She and her daughter were crossing Ashland Avenue at 65th Street. The mother and daughter did not wait for the traffic signal to change and started to cross when there was a break in southbound traffic on Ashland Avenue. Unable to make it across because there was a moderate amount of traffic on northbound Ashland Avenue, Ms. Lee and her daughter stopped and waited for northbound traffic to clear while standing within the center painted median. The median within which they were standing was not elevated, but was identified by yellow pavement markings and was roughly 5 feet wide. While they were waiting for traffic to clear, the contractor was traveling southbound on Ashland Avenue in the left through lane closest to the center median. Ms. Lee and her daughter were facing east so that their backs were toward the lane in which the contractor was operating the tractor. The tractor first struck Ms. Lee and knocked her to the ground. She was holding her daughter's hand, and the momentum of her fall caused Samira to be pulled downward toward the ground and into the path of the tractor's left rear tire. When police and fire arrived at the scene, Lee was observed sitting in the street holding her lifeless daughter. At the time of the collision, the contractor was working as a seasonal weed cutter and operating a lawn mowing tractor during the course and scope of his employment with a company called Truck Tire. Truck Tire is an independent contractor retained by the city to perform weed cutting services in vacant lots located primarily within the southwest side of the city. The weed cutters, like the operator that day, are seasonal workers that are not employed by the city. However, on a day-to-day basis, most of their interaction is with city personnel. The equipment the weed cutters use to perform their job is owned by Truck Tire, but per the terms of their operative contract, is stored at the ward yard. Typically, the weed cutter will report directly to the ward yard in the morning, check in, and meet with the ward superintendent. This arrangement supports the plaintiff's argument that Truck Tire's status as an independent contractor is questionable and thereby subjecting the city to liability for the alleged negligence. Based upon the city mandates, weed cutters were required to report to the ward yard when they arrive on the job and return to the ward at the end of their shift. The city dictated what time the weed cutters were supposed to take lunch and required the weed cutters to maintain a document called the Weed Cutting Daily Report. Any failure on the part of the weed cutter to comply with these requirements would be cause for the weed cutter to be sent home. The weed cutters could not operate a tractor unless a sticker bearing the city's emblem and name was affixed to the tractor, and the city mandated the type of clothing and safety equipment weed cutters were to wear while performing work. Most significantly, a weed cutter's violation of a city personnel rule could result in termination. After the accident, the city continued to retain the weed cutting services of Truck Tire. The operator involved in the accident no longer works for the company. Under the Wrongful Death Act, Lee seeks compensation for the grief, sorrow, and loss of society experienced because of her daughter's death. Lee also suffered minor physical injuries consisting primarily of bruising on her rear end and upper thigh. In addition, she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and is seeking recovery for her emotional injuries. It is highly probable that a jury will find the operator, and therefore the city, guilty of negligence. He should not have driven his tractor in the yellow median, and he has no explanation for why he could not have avoided striking Lee. While a jury might also find Lee partially at fault for crossing against a traffic light at a busy intersection, this would serve only to reduce her damages by the percentage of her fault, if any, as determined by the jury. A jury would have to find Lee more than 50% at fault to completely deny her any award, and as such, such a finding is not likely. Thus, the primary issue for the city in this case is whether the city is liable for the actions of the contractor. On this issue, the determination rests upon the level of control the city retained over Truck Tire. Trial for this matter commenced on May 15, 2019, and while trial was ongoing on May 24, 2019, parties reached an agreement to settle the case for $4 million in principal, subject to City Council approval. In addition to the $4 million offer from the city, Society Insurance Company offered the full amount of its $1 million policy issued to Truck Tire, which names the city as an additional insured. Society also has paid the city's defense costs related to this matter. There is a pending coverage dispute with an additional insurer, Liberty Mutual, related to $2 million in additional coverage, which the city contends should apply to this settlement. There is a declaratory judgment action in federal court related to this insurance dispute, which the city will continue to pursue. Plaintiff originally demanded $12 million to settle the case against the city alone. The proposed settlement of $4 million, inclusive of fees and costs, is a cost-effective measure to limit the city's financial exposure. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Alderman Hairston.
Thank you. I just want to say welcome. It is good to see a woman in the first assistant chair, and particularly a woman of color. I don't recall having seen one before, so I welcome you. And I also want to thank you for that very thorough presentation for us.
Thank you.
I think it helps us in the long run. I really don't have any questions because you answered most of the questions that we had, and I hope that this is an example of how we will get information in the future, and so I thank you for that. Just maybe one suggestion about the city's liability, because I'm seeing crop up, these $1 million limitations. So, and I know now is not the time to address it, but I think we need to give some consideration to the limitations of other insurance policies if the city is ultimately going to be liable, that we require the contractors to carry additional, but not the $1 million limitation. I recall seeing that with last month at the June with the barrier over by the, so I just want to put that on the radar while I'm remembering it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Moore.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, publicly, want to say welcome, and thank you for the briefing that we had. But it seemed like I heard something different. I had asked a question at briefing about the equipment, where it was it stored at the yard, or were they driving to the yard? In the briefing, we said they were driving. So today you said they are stored, their equipment is stored at the yard?
Yes, I may have misspoken. The equipment is stored at the ward yard, where the driver is required to check in before their shift.
Absolutely. And so, again, as I spoke in the briefing, and I'm hoping, whether this is the committee to request that information, but since this is being brought up here, I don't know if analysis have been done since we centralized the ward operations. And I would really like to see what our cost savings is, because we, as I stated in the briefing, as it relates to this situation, we're always opening ourselves up when someone, in my case, have to travel from the district, which is at on Western, I believe, at about 60 something in Western, and they have to travel all the way to the 17th Ward. And so if a weed cutter is traveling that long of a distance, it's always going to open itself up for possibility of more accidents. So what would help me, and in the past administration, if I heard everybody always say, yeah, we're saving money, we're saving money. I really want to know, since we centralized, how much are we saving? And that's got to include everything from incidents like this. It has to include more gas being used to travel from longer distances. All that has to be calculated in. So I don't know if, I've never seen a report. I don't know if you can speak to it, Chairman, if anybody ever presented a report. Are we really saving money on being centralized?
Alderman Moore, this is a question that did come up in the briefings from several aldermen, and we can request through Streets and Sand to provide that, and then see if it can go through this committee or whichever committee is appropriate, perhaps budget as well. But I'll make sure that we make that request and provide it.
And again, I just want to fully. No, thank you, Chairman. I just want to fully note that that this was a terrible incident, terrible accident, should I say, and tragedy. But I think, again, we're opening ourselves up when tractors have to travel that far from ward to ward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Smith.
Mr. Chairman, welcome to the administration, and thank you for the excellent report. I have a couple questions. First of all, did the driver of this vehicle have a CDL, have a commercial driver's license? Do we know?
Yes, per the terms of the contract, each driver assigned to a contract must have a valid driver's license and must be properly trained.
Has that driver been charged in any way? Has the individual been charged as part of the case? You know, with
The driver was issued a citation for failure to reduce speed to avoid an accident. That citation triggered alcohol and drug screening, which was negative. The citation was ultimately dismissed because the plaintiff did not appear in court.
Oh, okay. So, you know, a question that many of us have when we have to deal with liability is whether or not there are changes in the operating procedures of a department in order to, first of all, reduce liability, or in this case, whether $5 million goes a long way, $4 million goes a long way, whether these are operations that really should be outsourced given the liability. Is the law department, now that you're first assistant, thinking of engaging in any of these kinds of reviews of ending risk and deciding whether it's appropriate to have things outsourced given the liability risks?
Point of information, Alderman Tunney. Sorry, Alderman Smith.
It's in relation to Alderman Smith's question. She had asked whether the driver had a CDL, not a driver's license.
A commercial driver's license.
Yeah, commercial driver's license. You said just a driver's license.
The terms of the contract just reference a valid driver's license.
So that's not a CDL.
Oh.
Okay, just
Thank you.
point of information, that's all.
Thank you. I thought I heard you say, yes, he had a commercial driver's license. Thank you, Alderman Tunney. I misheard. Wow. Okay.
Alderman Smith's question.
To address your follow-up question regarding whether the law department is reviewing the terms of the contract, members of the law department have met with managers from Streets and Sanitation to discuss the lessons that arose from this case with respect to the liability that attached to the city based on the terms of the contract with this particular contractor. Those conversations are ongoing. Right now, the solicitation for bids for a new contract have been put on hold while that is ongoing. The OIG is also conducting an audit of the weed cutting program, and they will be coordinating with the law department along with Streets and Sanitation in light of that review.
Thank you very much. I guess I'd encourage the new law department to, you know, broaden its look at a lot of our liability in the past number of years to see what lessons we can learn to try to obviously reduce this kind of liability.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
All right. And the final question I had is the coverage dispute that you're having. If you are successful in obtaining some or all of the $2 million in coverage, will that go to reduce essentially will it be set against the city's payout to the plaintiff, or is it in addition?
Yeah, if the city is successful in recovering funds from that pending $2 million insurance policy, those funds would be used to offset the $4 million amount paid out.
And finally, the last question I have is, it's very typical in contracts with the city to require $1 million in coverage. Should we be relooking at that to obtain higher coverage limits for outside contractors?
Well, per the terms of this particular contract, Truck Tire was required to procure $2 million in general liability coverage and name the city as an additional insured. They had 3 commercial general liability policies of $1 million each, with the last insurer, Liberty Mutual, with which we have the current litigation, having an additional $1 million as an umbrella policy. So there is a minimum of $2 million in coverage required and $3 to $4 million in insurance available. $1 million has been offered to the family, One of those policies was not available for this particular type of accident. It was not covered. And the third policy is going through litigation right now.
Okay. Thank you very much for that explanation. No more questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Hopkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for a very detailed summary of the case. I just have one question. Since the determination was made that this contractor was not, in fact, acting as an independent entity, but was essentially a function of city government, was the city's tort immunity then extended to them, and was that a factor in this case at all?
I don't know the precise answer to that. I do know that at trial, the issue for the jury was the amount of control the city had over this particular driver, and that was the determinative issue for the jury that would determine whether the city would be held liable for the driver's negligence. I don't know about tort immunity. I can go back to the trial team and ask that question and provide that information to the chairman, if you'd like.
Yeah, I would. I'd be interested in what the opinion is on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Hopkins. Alderman Curtis?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Welcome. Congratulations on your appointment. I do just have, I don't have a problem at all about the payout because I do believe that the city is liable under the circumstances. But could you tell me what time again was that? Did that happen though?
I believe it was the morning in May of 2016. The mother was walking her daughter to school.
Okay, so that had to be before, after, and I would probably want to have a conversation with Department of Streets and Sanitation, and I echo Alderman Moore, the distance between the division office and the actual office, the ward yard. It is easier to drive to places in the ward when the tractor is in the ward. But when the tractor is traveling outside the district office to the ward, the liability gets greater. I just wanted to know, were they just leaving that district office at 6 a.m. on the way to the ward yard or on the way to a cutting assignment? But do we have that information?
If you give me one moment, I can try to find it in my notes. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay,
I
that's
can
fine.
try to find that right now, though.
I could figure it out just by basically the time of the incident.
I'm sorry, Alderman, I don't have that information in my overview. I just know the driver had stopped to use the restroom, had purchased a cup of coffee at a McDonald's about a block and a half away from the scene of the accident. But I'm not sure if he was coming or going from an assignment.
All right, thank you. No more questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Curtis. Alderman Scott? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So when you were talking, I heard you say that there was a $2 million liability, insurance liability from the contracted, from the contractor. And then I heard another $1 million, if I'm not mistaken, that you said was, I think, some kind of umbrella payment. Did I hear that correct? What?
So there is a minimum of $2 million in insurance required by the terms of the contract. The trucking company had 3 different insurance policies of a minimum of $1 million each. One of those insurers offered the full amount of its policy to the family. The second insurer had an exclusion provision in the policy that did not cover this type of accident. The law department sued for a decision with respect to that, and we were unsuccessful in that suit. The third insurer is currently in litigation with the law department to determine whether their $2 million policy should be applied to this accident. That suit is ongoing, so we don't have a decision yet.
So how does that affect the $4 million settlement that we've agreed into?
If the city is successful in that current litigation, any funds, whether it's the $2 million or a lesser amount reached as a result of settlement negotiations, would be applied to offset the $4 million paid out.
What about the $1 million that was offered to the family? Is that part of the $4 million, or that's over and above?
That's over and above. The truck tire company was also named as a plaintiff, as a defendant in this action. Their insurance provider is paying that $1 million on their behalf.
And with this ongoing litigation, how will we as the body know if we were successful at getting any of that settlement money to kind of offset? How will you report back to us and let us know?
That is certainly information we can report back. Right now, we're waiting for a decision from the judge to see if the city survives the summary judgment stage. And then if the city does, it would begin to engage in settlement discussions with that insurance company over the $2 million. An alternative would be to proceed to trial, which would be another set of expenses.
So
we would attempt to settle it.
if you could, through the chair, I don't think that it's necessary for you to come before the body, but through the chair, let us know what is the outcome of the judgment, so that we kind of know exactly what the liability for the city ends up being at the end of the day.
Yes.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Scott. Alderman Lopez.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin, first off, congratulations.
Thank you.
Two, this case, it always troubles me when these cases and these lawsuits are connected to my ward, and this was no different. This young girl died 1 block from where my ward office is now. It was a tragic day, sad day. I still remember it quite vividly. But no amount of money is ever going to bring that little girl back. And I think as we're trying to figure out how to move forward, I want to just join my colleagues in reminding everyone that we are reacting as opposed to being proactive at the moment. This was an $11 million contract, correct? Am I understanding that correctly based on what I received from finance? $11,043,620 contract, of which truck tire was 95.5% of the overall contract. There was also a Tulsa Power service. Are they included in this as well, I believe? I mention that because I'm not sure what the second contractor's responsibility, or were they part of like maintenance or upkeep for this, or fuel service, or what? Do you know what their portion of this contract was by chance?
I do not know that information.
Okay. There were a couple things in the contract that I actually just wanted to bring up, because I know that it was said that we would be viewed as being, they weren't just independent contractors, but pseudo city employees. Does their contract, section 2.1.4.5, that mentions the independent contractor, how would that section, which states that this contract is not intended and does not constitute, create, give rise to, or otherwise recognize a joint venture, partnership, corporation, or other formal business association or organization of any kind between the contractor and the city, how come that does not protect us from lawsuits where people are accusing us of being more than just hiring independent contractors?
I don't have that provision in front of me, and what you're asking requires a legal opinion, which I can certainly go back and get. I don't want to speculate. As far as the issue at trial, it came down to the level of control that the city had over the employee. But I'm happy to look into that particular provision, consult with the trial team, and follow up with a fulsome answer.
Well, this was something that actually came up in our briefings and has been sent to us a week ago by the Finance Committee. And in reviewing it, I'm just trying to understand, because I know a number of us had questions, and it's come up time and again, even here, where if we are dealing with independent contractors, you know, I think somebody said if we're always the uncle with the most money, we're always going to be the one hit. But if our contracts say that we are separate, as it's further referenced in section 2.1.6, where it says that a contractor must defend, indemnify, and keep hold and harmless the city, its officers, representatives, elected and appointed officials, agents, and employees from and against any and all losses. You know, that's another part of this contract that, again, makes me question, why do we have these parts in contracts if we're not going to uphold them, or if they're not protecting us when our contractors do something that puts us at risk?
All I can say at this point is that the terms of the contract are under review so that,
But this was the existing contract when this incident took place.
yes,
So if those are two examples of their existing contract, which said, and I'm assuming that the language is probably similar in other contracts as well. So if those two items that both protect us and exclude us from being viewed as anything more than just a contracting agency, not, you know, hand-in-hand partners, you know, I understand that right now it requires more conversation. But this was brought up a week ago in briefings. I'm bringing it up again because I don't think I've gotten a clear answer as to why we have this language if it's not protecting us. Well,
I want to answer your question. All I can say is for purposes of the trial, the standard operating procedure provision that set out the relationship between the driver and the ward superintendent was,
okay.
that was the point of focus. That was presented.
So regardless that the contract says we are all separate and divided, because this item, which was Exhibit 4, which says, I'm assuming it goes by the very first bullet, which says all weed cutters report to ward superintendents, that would have been the crux of their argument against us, correct?
The plaintiff's argument, yes, in conjunction with the testimony from the driver and the ward superintendent at trial.
So then if I may ask now, it's my understanding that weed cutters no longer report to ward superintendents, they actually report directly to the Bureau of Sanitation. How is their reporting to anyone in streets and sanitation change the dynamic that they are still not somehow, by that question of perception and who they're perceived to work for, how has that changed at all in protecting us? Because it would imagine that you're just moving the hat from one person to the next in the same department without actually providing a better barrier than what existed when this accident happened.
I don't know who they
And my
report
poor
to
colleague's
now,
about to fall
but
out of her chair.
I will say there's certain lessons from this case in the terms of the contract as written. So it's under review so that we can ideally avoid something like this in the future.
Alderman Lopez, point of information from Alder.
Point of information, maybe Alderman Lopez, and for you too. The problem, I believe, lies within the superintendent by creating certain orders without the benefit of legal advice, that they put in these procedures because it seems like a good thing to do without actually vetting them through the law department on commissioner's authority. And so I would suggest that we maybe look at the Department of Streets and Sanitation, what they are issuing as commissioner's authority to make sure that it gets vetted through the law department so that the law department is not finding itself in these situations in the future.
To my colleague's point then, Chairman, who writes when any department's SOPs come up? Aren't they always supposed to be vetted by lawyers, period? And my question then either to, I don't want to put you on the spot again, but I would gladly call up Mr. Jeff Levine and ask this question as well. Was an SOP like this actually vetted before a lawyer when this contract or once the contract was executed? Because I'm sure someone had to read this to make sure that it was legal and legitimate. And even if you take the very first line out of the SOP and scratch out Ward Soup and put in Bureau Chief of Sanitation, it's still a streets and sanitation that that person's reporting to, despite the fact that, you know, the Ward Soup is still the one creating the list. And if I, as Ward Soup, hand it off to the division, you know, the Bureau Chief here to pass off to Weed Cutter over there, their orders are still running through this whole department anyway. So no, it begs the question, how have we saved ourselves from this repeating itself? In terms of
After,
if the
Alderman
traffic-
Lopez, after your questions last week, and along with several other aldermen, that was something that I think the law department got the message, was that they needed to sit down with procurement to go through these SOPs, and this one in particular that we sent out to everyone showed definitively what the department was asking them to do. But they've been asked to review at least this particular SOP in the future contract and sit down with procurement before they move any further on a new contract. That's all we did, was to make sure that they were told, we'd like you to come back and explain to us.
And in the meantime, this contract ended in March 31st of this year, correct?
No, it was extended until
Well, I
2020.
mean, the original contract, and now it's extended until when? I'm sorry?
2020,
Okay, so
March 2020, sorry.
have the changes or other items, has the contract been amended to be more reflective? Like, for example, you know, we still use this contractor. Has his insurance liabilities been adjusted to ensure that he's properly insured so that there aren't questions? Or is he going to provide more insurance or provide proof of insurance so that we don't have questions arise if there's another accident in the next year and a half?
I'm not aware of any amendments to the current contract. I just know that solicitation for new bids have been put on hold while the terms of the contract are reviewed for future business.
Okay.
We can have that brought through the chair and sent out to each one.
Thank you. You know, I just want to say that, and, you know, I'm sorry, but we do a lot of weed cutting in my ward. We, and as well as a number of my colleagues on and around the south and west sides in particular, you know, in wards where you have thousands of lots getting cut, the opportunities for this kind of accident are high. And the fact that this is one of the few that we've had is remarkable. But that being said, you know, once it happens, you have to make sure your best that it never happens again, and two, if it does, that we are protecting residents in our city. And I just want to make sure that as we move forward, I mean, my ward's now on its fourth cutting, that God forbid anything happens in the future, that we are all doing everything we can, asking as many questions as we can to protect our children as best we can, or residents. I move to pass, Chairman.
Alderman Lopez, Alderman Beal first.
Thank you. I also wanted to chime in on your congratulations on your position.
Thank you.
But I wanted to just piggyback on some of the things that my colleagues were stated. It's because of this particular lawsuit that weed cutting is extremely horrible right now in the city of Chicago. I particularly have a couple of weed cutters who disappear, and because they're not under the jurisdiction of the Ward Soup, because of this ordinance, because of this lawsuit, people are able to go and hide and not fulfill the list that they are giving, and there's no repercussion that the city has going after other than, you know, just report it, just report it, just report it. And so, you know, weed cutting right now is horrible as far as, you know, the far south side is concerned, because, you know, there's no repercussions for, you know, these weed cutters. So there are no checks and balances. And so I have taken this to the higher authorities, but until this lawsuit is, you know, kind of subsides and the new contract is put in place, we really have no jurisdiction on these particular weed cutters. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you, Alderman Beal. Renewing Alderman Lopez's motion to pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. Our second item, B, is Tyrone Scott versus the City of Chicago. And Ms. Rodney will give us background on that one as well. Ms. Rodney.
Thank you. The second proposed settlement would resolve a lawsuit brought by Tyrone Scott, who was arrested in June 2012 by Chicago police officers and charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm, aggravated unlawful use of a weapon, and being an armed habitual criminal. Scott spent nearly 4 years in pretrial detention before the assistant state's attorney dismissed the charges. Scott has sued the city of Chicago and several Chicago police for constitutional violations related to the underlying arrest. The law department recommends a settlement of $650,000 inclusive of attorney's fees and costs. On June 25, 2012, officers approached several individuals, including Scott, who fled before the officers could make contact. What happens next varies between the plaintiff and the defendant officers, and the outcome will rely on who the jury believes is more credible. The officers claim they pursued Scott through a vacant building and saw him drop a handgun during flight. An officer collected the handgun during the chase. Although the officers lost sight of Scott, they claim a maintenance worker directed them toward a stairwell of a nearby apartment building. The officers claim they heard Scott on the stairwell and saw him enter an apartment and close the door behind him. Based on the circumstances, they forced entry into the apartment, where they took Scott into custody. Scott, however, alleges that no officers followed him into the vacant building. He further claims that the police officers arrived at the door to his niece's apartment, and the officers kicked open the door and entered. The officers swore at Scott's family members and threatened to cut off their utilities and public aid. Scott exited the bathroom. One officer retrieved a handgun from his own vest and accused Scott of possessing it. Scott alleges that he never possessed a handgun. The state's attorney's office approved felony charges against Scott for being a felon in possession of a firearm, aggravated unlawful use of a weapon, and being an armed habitual criminal. In court, the assistant public defender stated the assistant state's attorney was unlikely to fingerprint the weapon. Scott was incarcerated for approximately 4 years while the criminal charges were pending. On April 1, 2016, the assistant state's attorney dropped the charges. Upon information and belief, the assistant state's attorney dismissed charges after receiving a notification that an IPRA investigation had been expanded to include Rule 14 violations against 2 of the officers, and viewing subsequent materials showing their inconsistent statements to IPRA regarding the underlying incident. Our trial team has pointed out several credibility issues in this matter that will increase the likelihood of a finding against the officers. One officer initially described the pursuit as a mostly direct path from the officer's initial contact with Scott to his arrest in the third-floor apartment, and the arrest report states officers were in hot pursuit. More specifically, in his initial statement, this officer stated that he followed Scott, observed Scott shut the door after entering the third-floor apartment, and that the door was covered in blood. However, OEMC transmissions indicated that the pursuit lasted approximately 15 minutes and that this officer had lost sight of Scott and was searching for him in the basement of the apartment building for some period. The OEMC transmissions further indicated that this officer had been searching the basement when another officer asked if anyone had searched the apartment with blood on it. This suggests that the officers were not outside the door to the apartment when Scott entered and had either passed by the door initially or had not moved past it at all. In his second statement, the officer admitted he entered the basement of the building, but that after doing so, he was informed by a maintenance worker that plaintiff Scott had gone up the stairs. He stated he saw Scott in the stairwell, pursued Scott to the door, and observed him close it. Based on these inconsistencies, in 2015, the IPRA alleged that the officer violated Rule 14 by making several false statements during his interview with IPRA and in the reports that he authored, including that he saw the plaintiff enter the third-floor apartment. Another officer on scene is similarly accused of making false statements to IPRA concerning the circumstances surrounding the plaintiff's arrest. On May 7, 2019, COPA completed IPRA's investigation and did not sustain Rule 14 violations against any defendant officer in this case. However, the investigation took nearly 7 years to complete, and its conclusions as to the Rule 14 violations were based on procedural rather than substantive grounds. Although no disciplinary action resulted from COPA's investigation, plaintiff will likely use the additional allegations from 2015 to impeach the officers and argue that they lack credibility. Further, plaintiff will argue that the city compounded his harm by failing to complete the investigation more quickly, since the criminal attorneys were delaying trial in part because they were awaiting the outcome of the IPRA investigation. Regardless of the final determination by COPA, the inconsistency between the officers' accounts and the OEMC transmissions will be used by opposing counsel to show that the officers did not in fact see Scott enter the third-floor apartment, did not have probable cause, let alone exigent circumstances, to enter the apartment, and were not in hot pursuit as stated in the arrest report. For these reasons, it is prudent to resolve the claims in this case prior to trial. The damages are that plaintiff spent nearly 4 years in Cook County Jail while his criminal case was pending. Plaintiff's initial demand was for $2 million. We negotiated and offered $650,000 subject to City Council approval. Plaintiff initially refused this offer and demanded more money. When the city refused, he eventually reconsidered and accepted the $650,000 offer. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Alderman Mitz.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is what's the officers involved? What was their background in terms of sustained cases? Do you have any information on?
Yes. Of the two officers, one had one sustained CR for neglect of duty, conduct unbecoming, regarding an incident from August 15, 2008, where the officer left evidence in the station within reach of an arrestee who managed to obtain it and destroy it. The second officer had two sustained CRs. The first was for neglect of duty, conduct unbecoming, regarding an August 14, 2006 incident. During that incident, it was alleged that the officer's brother was arrested. The officer reported to the police station, where it's alleged that the officer and his family members used profanity and pushed other police personnel at the station. During interviews into those allegations, there were several inconsistencies noted between the officer's statements of his family members, and various other police and civilian witnesses. In the end, BIA sustained 2 rule violations against that officer, and he received a 5-day suspension. A second incident from 2008 alleged that that officer shot and pistol whipped juveniles that had thrown a rock at his car. CPD moved to separate the officer for that incident, but the police board found him not guilty of all charges, and he was reinstated in 2013.
Thank you. You just told me that this inconsistency didn't just start. That's what I was trying to get to. Thank you.
Alderman Taylor Farrell.
Madam Chair, what was the original, I'm sorry I missed it, what was the original jury demand from the plaintiffs? Yeah.
$2 million.
$2 million? Thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Sposato.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No questions. Renee, I'm not sure what the direction asked Ms. Rodney, Corporation Counsel what, but I just want to say welcome aboard. Really appreciate the briefing last Thursday, and I wish you the best. So,
Thank you.
thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. There's been a motion by Alderman Bill to move to pass. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. That we have one person that has submitted a information slip for testimony. Is there a Mr. Mike Flournoy present? All right, he is not. So that concludes. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Alderman Scott moves to adjourn. All in favor? All opposed? Pending the chair, the ayes have it. We're adjourned.